Yeah, good. That's great. Now, how do you know?
You're going to leave the lights here?
You know God's a life-changing God, right? He is, right? And I believe He's going to change some lives this week when I go see her. Okay. Got a metronome going on, Mom? So, Mom, if you go to the settings,
Sorry.
you turn off the metronome when you're recording.
Sorry. Newbie today on the sound system.
My message was going to be a little slower paced than that. But we have a metronome. We can just bring it down.
How do I turn
The
that
slower. No, but I believe in a life-changing God. He's going to change some lives this week. He's going to change mine when I see Star Wars: The Last Jedi on Thursday. Anyone looking forward to Star Wars? Anyone? All right, a little about me. I'm a nerd. It's true. I know I play guitar and things, but during the week I watch Star Wars. Love Star Wars. Oh, there it is.
I'm trying.
Again, just a little too fast. All right, so if you guys don't know me, my name is Jordan. I'm Pastor Steve's son. If you haven't seen me before, it's because I've been gone for a little while. So I've been living in Austria, which is in Central Europe, not Australia. No kangaroos in Austria. But I've been living there for about 4 years with my wife. And we were going to a great church over there called CIG. We were in the ministry there. And while I was over there, I just felt like God was calling me to come back to Napa. Come back home. Also, I want to come back home and miss you guys. Miss my friends, miss my family. So that's a little bit about me. Where's Pastor Steve at? You might be asking. He's in Mexico. So some of you guys know. So our pastor, Pastor Steve, and some of our members of our congregation are down in Mexico. They're doing a pretty great mission trip today. Did they do the shoes? Did they do shoes yesterday? Yeah. So they gave out some shoes to some homeless and orphans, and really blessing them. And a lot of these kids, they wait for this time of year so they can get their shoes to get through the next year, get some clothes to get through until next Christmas. We've been going down there every year. Well, I have but hopefully next year, I had some school to go to, but next year I'm hoping I get down there. So that's where our pastor is. And today we're going to be following up on what Pastor was talking about last week. He was preaching out of Luke 1. And if you remember, we had a short one. So last week, it was a lot of worship, and my father had a short message, and it was about Mary and her first visitation by the angel Gabriel. So we're going to be looking at the next part of the story, which is Gabriel visiting Zechariah, who would be the father of John the Baptist. So we're going to be reading out of Luke chapter 1, verse 5 through 25. So you can pull that up on the screen, and we can read this together. So I'm only going to ever ask you guys to stand on 2 occasions, during worship and during the reading of the word. So if you guys can stand with me, and if you can also read it with me, that would be great. All right, so let's read this all together. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. We don't know. Abijah sounds fine. We'll stick with that one. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all of the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. So next slide. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshippers were praying outside. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to them, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he was born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I'm an old man, and my wife is well along in years." Real quick, let's leave it there. Let's look at the wisdom of that statement real quick. How can I be sure of this? I'm an old man, and my wife is well along in years. Right? Good one, Zechariah. Very specific wording there. I'm old, but my wife is well along. That's wisdom there. So we already learned something today. Remember that. Later on, my wife's well along in years. Got it. All right, let's go to the next one. The angel said to him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not be able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering why he stayed so long in the temple. When he came out, he could not speak to them. They realized he had seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them, but remained unable to speak. When his time of service was completed, he returned home. After this, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and for 5 months remained in seclusion. The Lord has done this for me, she said. In these days he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people. God, I just ask you to bless this service today, God, and ask that you would speak through me, Lord, and that you would really prepare the hearts this morning to just receive your word, God, and ask that you would have your will in this service. And in your mighty name, amen. So you guys can have a seat. I'm going to get a drink of water real quick. A lot of scripture, am I right? It's a lot, but it's good, and I'm going to be referring to it, so it's good that we read it through in the beginning. So I just want to tell you a bit about myself and my time in Vienna. So before I left, I actually haven't been attending the church for about 7 years now. So I was attending here, and I was planning after I graduated high school to go to the Hillsong College in Australia. Because, I had been doing worship here. I feel like it's a call on my life to do worship. And Hillsong, they were the popping ones at the time. They're still doing good, They got lots of bands. They're one of the top. They're on Spotify, they're on iTunes, they're on the radio. And I was just thinking, if I'm going to learn, the most, I could probably learn the most from Hillsong. That makes the most sense to me. So I've been praying about it, and I was thinking about it. And I remember I graduated in January of 2010. And the Hillsong School was going to start in January 2011. So I've been praying over that summer with my dad, and we were looking at saving up some money and how we are going to pay for it to go down to Australia. And I remember that one night, I think it was somewhere around July, perhaps June or July. I was here at the church. I was up here in the corner. I was just praying, and I felt like God told me that. You're not going to Hillsong. And I was like, excuse me? It's one of those things where you hear it and you're like, oh, that's just me. I'll keep praying. God, give me money for Hillsong. Please, and then just like, you're not going there. I'm like, real quick. I had to go tap my dad on the shoulder. Hey, I'm just wondering if I was here. I was praying and just, I kept feeling this, the peace about the statement, that I knew that it was true. That God was telling me that Hillsong wasn't for me, it wasn't going to work out. So I kept praying, and I was like, well, it's July. God. So I'm going to go to college. I'm too late. If you guys have gone to college before, you have to submit like a year in advance. You have to send them your, all kinds of stuff and do interviews and all these things called drum together. So it was a long process. I couldn't pull that all together between July and August. I had a few weeks. So I said, well, if I go back to college, I'd have to start. And while I'm thinking about college and all this stuff, God said, I want to send you to the Father's house in Vacaville. And I was like, okay, God, I plan to go out, pretty far. I was thinking Australia. That's quite far. That's a long flight. A lot of ocean between here and Australia. And I was like, Vacaville is about 20 minutes on a good day and about 2 hours on a Friday. Amen? Can I get an amen on that? Yeah, we need 4 lanes out there. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I get that. So, and I had known that my cousin had gone and she was going again, and it started the second week of August, I believe. And I was like, well, that's a few weeks away, God. I don't know about that. And so I begun to, I said, okay, and so then I talked to my dad about it after prayer, and we've been praying together, and he also felt that that's where I should go, even though I'm planning to go to Hillsong. But I need some water. Give me 1 second. And so we've been praying about it, and we went and talked to them, and the tuition that I needed to go there was like $6,000, which is a lot of money to come up with in a few weeks. So I was talking to some of my friends and family, and we had got some money together to make it happen. But I was still about $1,500 short, which is a lot of money. And I didn't feel like selling a kidney. So I went back into prayer, and I was like, God, I like my body parts. I'd like them to stay where they're at. My kidneys are doing great for me right now. I don't want to have to sell them to make money to go to this internship. And if you ever felt like God told you something before, you put it on Him. I said, Lord, you told me to go. This is your idea. This isn't my idea. You need to make this happen. So sure enough, he did. Someone, if I remember correctly, my mom told me that someone who had came to the church once or twice, now lived, I'm not sure, but she lived somewhere else, no longer in America, had heard of this and sent me $1,500, which is crazy. Because I didn't know her name, I didn't know who it was, but talk about a blessing. And this was I think we were about a week out until it was starting. So I needed to tell them in a few days, either, hey, I don't have the money, I can't go, or, the money was going to show up. So the money showed up and I got to go. And so it was a really incredible experience for me because I had felt that it was impossible up to that point in time. We were a few days out, and I'm like, $1,500 doesn't seem, it's not going to seem like it's going to happen. In the same way that, Zechariah. Zechariah was well along in years. He was an older gentleman, so was his wife. And he had thought that essentially his time had expired. God, you could have given me, in my situation, God, could you just give me the $1,500 a month in advance? Could you at least give it to me a little bit sooner? But it's in the same way in Zechariah's case, we see that he was well along in years. And then I'd also like to point out, if we could go to this slide, it is, I think it's 2 slides down. So we could go down to the next one. Next slide. There we go. That one right there, yeah. So this is one thing I'd like to point out that I noticed while I was reading the story this week. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." So the thing that stood out to me when I was reading this, which is quite different from Mary's situation. So in Zechariah's situation, the angel says, "Your prayer has been heard." So the difference here is that Zechariah had been praying for a son. That's what I garnered from this verse here. And then the question is, how long had Zechariah been praying for this son? So how many years had passed, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years? How long had he been praying for a son and just not had a son? And so when I'm reading this, if you could jump back to the slide right before that, Luke 1:5. So there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division, and they were both descendants of Aaron, and Aaron was part of the priesthood. So what I was trying to get to was, I saw Mary, and I saw Zechariah, and I'm thinking to myself, so here's Zechariah. He's a priest. So he makes offerings. He knows the Word of God. He's been around a while. He's an old man. And yet, he can't believe something that's much easier to believe than what Mary had to believe. And when we look at what Mary, so the angel goes to Mary and he says, hey, you're going to have a kid. Mary's 16-year-old farm girl, okay, not priest, 16-year-old farm girl, says, you're going to have a kid, even though you're a virgin. And I don't know if we mentioned it last week, but the angel actually tells her as well, your Aunt Elizabeth is also pregnant, and she's going to have a son. And she knew as well that Zechariah and Elizabeth were unable to have children. So Mary not only had to believe in her own virgin birth, but then had to believe that her barren aunt and her uncle Zechariah were also going to have a kid. And so she believes, but Zechariah doesn't. And I think one of the key point there is that Zechariah had given up hope to the point where he had been praying so long to have a son that eventually, I don't know if you guys have done this, but sometimes I'll be praying for something similar to how I was praying, for my internship, which was I kept praying, God, I need the money. I don't have the money. I can't get the money. I need this to happen. And you keep going, you keep praying, and a week goes by, and 2 weeks go by, and 3 weeks go by, 4 weeks go by, and you're getting closer and closer to what you're praying for, and it's just not happening yet. And so, even though you may still be praying, you start to stop believing along the way. So, let's see here. Let's go to the third slide here, Luke 1:18. There we go. Yeah, so this is his questioning statement where he says, "How can I be sure of this? I'm an old man, and my wife is well along in years." And so I'd like to contrast this with the same question that Mary was asked. So I think we have a slide there. It's Luke 1:18 and 1:34. So it's a few down. Sorry, I'm making them jump around all over the place. Oh, thanks, Mom. I haven't heard the metronome yet. You're doing a great job. Just joking. Next, a little further down.
This one? Yes.
There we go. Yeah, so these are the two verses. So this is one we looked at last week where my dad talked about Mary and her visitation with Gabriel. And then this is the, just before with Zechariah. So Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I'm an old man and my wife is well along in years." And we have Mary who says, "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "Since I am a virgin." Would you guys agree? It kind of seems like the same question, right? Yet the difference is that Zechariah is punished for asking his question. We could go back to that slide. Luke 1:19 should be the one right before it, I believe. That's the one. The angel said to him, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I've been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time." So what we have here is seemingly the same question is asked, but when the angel responds to Mary, he actually, he explains it to her, and then she believes. So what's strange is trying to decipher, well, if they ask the same question, why is it that Zechariah was punished, but Mary was not punished? Also, I just want to point out, Gabriel kind of seems like a little ticked off, don't you think? He's like, "Hey, I'm an old man, how's this going to happen?" And Gabriel goes, "Excuse me, I'm Gabriel. Look at this, I stand in the presence of God." He's going through it. Listen, you've been a priest for a long time, and an angel has appeared to you. Can we talk about this for a second? Now, I'd also like to point out that Zechariah really had plenty of cause to believe in what happened. So we know that they are also descended from Abraham. Abraham was also well along in years when God visited him and told him that he would have a son, even though his wife was barren. And we know that came to pass because, well, all of the Jews came from Abraham. So there's that. And as well, Daniel was also visited by Gabriel. And the interesting thing is that Gabriel also visited Daniel at the offering of incense. So at this same time that Zechariah is being visited, Daniel was also visited by the same angel. So Zechariah had plenty of cause to believe because, first of all, he's a priest, and he would know well the story of Daniel and of Abraham and those before him. And the same miracle had happened with Abraham that was being told by him by the same angel at the same offering of incense that he had visited Daniel. And so he's made mute. And can we go back to, let's see here, the cross-reference between Mary and Zechariah? I think there's one word here that we can pick apart, and I think it kind of shows exactly how Gabriel knew who was believing and who wasn't. One second. So when I read these two, I had to reread it a few times, and I had to hear it in the car. And actually, when I heard it in the car is when I really heard this one word that stuck out to me. So the two questions asked, Zechariah says, "How can I be sure of this? I'm an old man, and my wife is well along in years." And Mary said, "How will this be, since I am a virgin?" The differences here are Zechariah says the verb can, And Mary uses the verb will. So Mary says, how will this be? And, if I will do it, or I can do it. Those are two different things. So Zechariah is saying, how can I be sure of this? Also, he's asking, can I be sure? An angel just appeared to me, bro. Can we just talk about that? An angel appears to you? A dude, the dude just pops up out of nowhere and goes, hey, you're going to have a kid? And you go, Gabriel, I hear what you're saying, but how can I be sure of this? No, I don't know. I'd be sure if some dude just popped up. Now, if right now, boom, dude's glowing and stuff, and it's like, you're going to have a kid. You're like, I'm going to have a kid. All right, I got it. But, Zechariah who says, how can I be sure of this? And then he also, because they also call it the same thing, they talk about, science. I'm an old man, and she's a virgin. But how will this be? She essentially is holding the belief, even though it seems impossible in her sentence. How will this be? Because she's saying, I hear what you're saying, and I know that it will happen, but I would like to know, how is that going to happen? All right. And then, so in between this, we have, after Zechariah has talked and Gabriel met with Gabriel, he's made mute. Also, I feel like that's what Gabriel technically did answer his question. He said, how can I be sure of this? He goes, well, I can make you be sure that it's a real thing. I'll just take your voice away. And so after that, we have the verse that my dad spoke about last week where Gabriel goes to Mary. And in between, Mary goes to visit Elizabeth and Zechariah. So when she goes to visit Zechariah and Elizabeth, when she arrives at their house, it's said that John the Baptist stirs in Elizabeth's belly, and she becomes, the Holy Spirit comes upon her, and she starts talking to Mary, and Mary rejoices. And I didn't put it on because there's a lot of scripture today. I didn't want to have to put it in there. And Elizabeth, sings a song essentially, and she talks about how, how great it is that she was barren, and Elizabeth is barren, and now she's going to have a son, and how she's carrying Jesus. And what we get from that is Zechariah. If we can cut to the end there, let's see. Do I have Luke 1:57 through 66 there at the end? All right, so I'll read this to you real quick. So this is what happens after that. So Mary comes and visits. She goes, wow, this is amazing. The Holy Spirit's there. Wow, this is great. Exactly what's happening to us. And nothing happens from Zechariah, which he can't talk. So apparently he didn't make it in there. So it picks up here in verse 57. It says, when it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown her great mercy, and they shared her joy. I think that has to do with the actual birthing process. That it was smooth and there were no complications. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him after his father, Zechariah. But his mother spoke up and said, no, he is to be called John. They said to her, there is no one among your relatives who has that name. The next one. Then they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, his name is John. So this is also something interesting when I was reading. It said, to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, his name is John. And I don't think the astonishing part was that he was naming the son John. The astonishing part to me was that up until this time, not only was John not able to speak, but it appears that John was also unable to write. He was unable to communicate through writing, because there's no other reason for them to be astonished at the fact that he's writing something. So as soon as he writes, his name is John, immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue set free, and he began to speak, praising God. All the neighbors were filled with awe, and throughout the hill country of Judea, people were talking about all these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, when or what then is this child going to be? For the Lord's hand was with him. And then right after this, I also didn't include it because it's quite a bit. It's another long rejoicing of Zechariah. So after Zechariah's tongue is set free, and after this time, he goes on and talks about how great the Lord is, that he blessed him with John, not it's the Bible. Okay. So sorry about that. So we have him rejoicing, and what I noticed when I was also reading this passage was that when Mary visits Elizabeth, she also rejoices over what's happened. And Zechariah also rejoices over what happened. It's seemingly the same as well, but the difference here is when they rejoice. So Mary visited Elizabeth before Elizabeth had had her child. And there are miscarriages and things that happen when people are pregnant. The promise had not come to pass yet. There was still, a period of time between, John being born and when Mary had come to visit. So Mary had gone there and visited for about 3 months. And Mary was also pregnant with Jesus. But she was able to rejoice before the promise had come to pass, while Zechariah was only able to rejoice after the promise had happened. So for us to learn there is that we can either, sit in anxiety and in fear, like I did. Unfortunately, I was not able to trust during the time before the internship because, it seemed too big. $1,500 seemed like too much money for me to just, go. You can't ask people for that kind of money, So for me, it was hard because I was sitting there, I remember countless nights just thinking, just being stressed out, not being able to sleep. Like, I know that this is what I hear that this is what you're saying, God. I heard you say you're going to go there, but it's happening. It's going to happen in a week, and I don't have what I need to get to that point. And at that point, if I don't have it, then I don't get to do it. And in the same case, Zechariah also, he did not believe and was punished essentially up until the point where John was born, and then he was able to rejoice. And for us, what I feel like we can learn from that is that if we believe the promise at the start, we're able to rejoice between the promise and between the fulfillment of the promise. And if we are not able to believe, we struggle with fear and anxiety and all these other things. And then when the promise happens, we can rejoice afterwards. But all that time in between, we were fearful, we had anxiety, we were struggling through that time. And also, it's very interesting. I think the reason why Zechariah's tongue was freed is that his wife says he is to be called John, and Zechariah says his name is John. And I think it's a realization for him now that John has come. He's fully believed it, because I'm sure that he believed, right? Because my wife is pregnant, and like I said, there's miscarriages, there can be complications during birth. There's lots of things between being pregnant and having the child. Things can still go wrong, and I'm not sure whether or not, the Bible doesn't say whether or not Zechariah believed immediately. But I like his statement, which is his name is John, where his wife says he is to be called John. And it's almost like a future tense. He is to be called, and his name is John. I feel like Zechariah was remembering the promise and had accepted it as true back then, because he said his name is John. As if his name had been John from the beginning, from the promise. And at that point of realization, Zechariah, finally believed 100% that yes, this is my son John. So for us, I really like to go back to what Zechariah said, where he had been praying for a son. So if we've been praying for something that seems impossible and you start losing faith, what I would really like to lift us up today is that to start believing in what we've been praying for. So we might be praying for certain things, like we've been praying for our health or for our finances and stuff. And sometimes you got the book in front of you and you go, God, I really want you to know my finances. All right, nothing there. God, really like you to. No, it's not changing. So what we're trying to do is believe and be able to rejoice between the promise of God and the fulfillment of God's promise. So, and then I have that coin phrase, believing is better. Right? It's a great one. It has alliteration, a B and the follows with the B. I like the tone of it. Believing is better. So let's pray today. God, we thank you for this day, and we ask that you would bless us and just really be in our lives, Lord. We ask that we would remember the promises that you had for us if we had forgotten them, Lord. That we would continue to pray, God, with a new fervor. We would begin to believe before it comes to pass, God. Before your promises are fulfilled, God, we ask that you would bless us, take away any fear, anxiety, and allow us to believe, Father. Give us the strength to continue believing. Even though Zechariah had prayed, we don't know, even us as we've been praying, God, for maybe 20, 30, 40 years, God, for a promise that we feel that you had given us, Lord. We ask that you would allow us to believe, God. And give us the strength to believe, the faith to believe, and allow us to rejoice now before the promise is fulfilled. In your mighty name, amen. Alrighty, well, we'll see you guys next week. I hope you guys have a great week. Have a good one. We'll see you guys.